Aaron David Miller, I'm going to bring you in on this. Matt is talking about how this moment feels different than others. What's your sense of things?
Well, you know, I've been really reluctant and hesitant to make a judgment that we're really headed for what I think we all fear, which is a major escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, which not only involves an Israeli ground up in southern Lebanon, but Hezbollah's use of its precision-guided missiles, of which they have around 400, and they can launch 3,000 missiles a day. That sort of saturation against Israel, even with Israel's sophisticated air layer defense, Iron Dome, David Sling, and the Arrow, you're talking hundreds, if not more, Israeli deaths. You're talking about the destruction of Israeli infrastructure, electricity, grid, water desal plants, and you're talking about an Israeli preemption and reaction in Lebanon that would kill thousands of Lebanese, destroying the Dahya, southern Beirut, which has as many as 1 million people. We haven't gotten the casualty reports yet. The Lebanese Ministry of Health, I think, was reporting 2 dead and 78 wounded, but that's clearly very preliminary. So going after Hassan Nasrallah, who moves around a lot, he rarely is seen in public. The real question I have tactically is whether or not Netanyahu had given a standing order to Israeli intelligence and IDF, should they identify his location to act, and maybe just hours before the prime minister's speech, perhaps even during the speech, they identified where he was and then tried to strike. As far as Hezbollah's reaction, it seems to me a 3-week ceasefire, which was on life support even before this happened, proposed by the U.S. and the French, is simply not going to work. Hezbollah now has a credibility, legitimacy problem. Depending on the death count in the southern suburbs, you could be talking the largest single casualty strike. That means this is going to go on with the risks of escalation higher, I think, than they've ever been.
So they fired on Tel Aviv the other day. Hezbollah did. The Houthis fired again on Tel Aviv. I believe it was late last night, early this morning, Israeli time. There has been calls by Hezbollah to Iran to get into this battle. We have a statement from Iran's embassy in Beirut blaming the Israelis, saying they're committing bloody massacre. They're targeting densely populated residential neighborhoods, issuing false justifications. I mean, Hezbollah is putting these missiles into neighborhoods. I don't think we should lose sight of that. How likely is it? I mean, Iran has said it doesn't want to get involved, doesn't want a regional war. How likely is it that Iran is going to become more directly involved? At what point will that country feel that their hands are tied or they'll be forced to move? I guess that's the million-dollar question.
I mean, I think, look, Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy, an Iranian asset.
Yeah.
Its high-trajectory weapons are reserved, however, not to liberate Palestine or even fight Israelis. It's a contingency in the event the U.S. and or Israel engaged in direct attacks against Iranian territory, particularly against Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities. That's what those high-trajectory weapons are there for. So I think Tehran, I think that is still very risk-averse, needs to make a calculation. How much trouble is Hezbollah in? Is it going to reserve its response against Israel in the event the Israelis escalate by launching a ground op into southern Lebanon, or is it going to show support in response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, which the Israelis have not claimed responsibility for, on July 31st in Tehran? They vowed they were going to respond to that. So again, the cusp of escalation, yes, but not quite at the point where I think we're moving towards something the Middle East has never experienced before, which would be a multi-front war, not with the deployment of ground forces, but with the use of UAVs, AI, cyber, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, strikes against population centers, an Israeli-Iranian exchange with the U.S., with at least one carrier strike group brought into the Eastern Med with tremendous firepower. I mean, we're moving closer, perhaps, to that. Aaron, diplomacy, maybe, but, Not now.
I want to interrupt because we're looking at live images of search and rescue in Beirut, and we've just seen it appears to be a father and at least 2 young children, and another, I think, a third as well, pulled from the rubble of at least one of the strikes. It appears it was multiple strikes. Maybe it was a cascading effect from other ground-level artillery or missiles. I'm not sure. But we're watching these images of families being taken away and given medical treatment. These are exactly the images that I imagine that groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran want the world to see, the destruction caused by Israeli missiles. Look what they're doing to families. Look what they're doing. Look at the way that they treat Lebanese life, the way they treat Palestinian life, etc. How does Israel reckon with the need to go after Hezbollah or Hamas and the fact that they are embedded in residential neighborhoods? They are embedded within civilian populations.
Well, you've watched 11 months now of Israel's efforts to prosecute a war.
And it's not going so well for Israel's reputation.
Well, no, the Israeli brand, I think, whether or not it's permanently tarnished or undermined here or in the international community, I mean, that's clearly the headline. Whether that's going to be the trend line is unclear to me. That is going to turn, I think, Katie, on whether or not there's a leadership change in Israel, which is critically important. And, I would only point out the obvious. When the Middle East trends toward the positive, when we're talking about de-escalation and actually reaching agreements, it's because we have leaders that are willing and able to rise above perhaps their own ideologies to do what's in the best interest of their respective peoples. Sadat and Menachem Begin, for example, King Hussein and Rabin and Yasser Arafat. I mean, apartheid ended in South Africa in a way no one would ever have anticipated, largely because of Mandela and de Klerk. And I would say, without putting Benjamin Netanyahu in the same category as Hassan Nasrallah, Yahya Sinwar, and the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, if these are the 4 leaders that are essentially making the tactical and strategic decisions for this piece of the region, I mean, I think we're in serious trouble. And again, I would not trivialize Israel's security needs, its requirements, the legitimacy of responding against Hezbollah. I mean, after all, this is not Israel and the Palestinians. This is Israel and an organization that is in violation of a Security Council resolution which compelled them to move beyond the Litani River. And Israel has every right, it seems to me, to protect its border and see the return of its citizens. Just the implications of carrying out that right involve moral and ethical choices and the deaths of innocents. That's where this becomes almost impossible to unwind, but the imperative is to make it stop.